because I feel like I get to bring these conversations like all out um, in the open. And
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you to every single person that has joined us and possibly everybody that's going to come in. So every time I think of you or I see a post of you, the first two words that come to my mind is innovation and exponential. I think it's that's if you had to have other names, those would
Yeah,
be yours.
that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, because you teach about it so much, and I
Yeah,
think
for
it's just
sure.
really coming in my head. So that's what I really want to kind of chat to you about today, but on a more smaller scale. I know you do quite a lot of talks with like big corporates and all of that, but I just want to bring
Yeah,
it a little bit to like smaller scale today, as far as like small businesses is concerned,
for
like
sure.
people that are running side hustles now.
Yeah.
And I think to begin with, I'd like us to just start on just the word innovations. I must tell you that I thought innovation was something completely different
Yeah.
to eventually what I then found out it was. In my head, I just technology that these big factories have. So if you can just kind of take us through that,
Yeah.
what is innovation?
Yes, I think it's funny that you asked that because I literally just given a talk this morning, a webinar talk to a bunch of people about this exact same topic.
Yeah,
Um, and I think the issue is like with all the buzzwords that we have,
yeah,
innovation, tech, disruption, they all kind of get lumped together, and no one really knows what it actually means to be innovative.
mm,
And I think it's a common thing. So it's not like I don't think you're alone in feeling like that. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions, and if
mm,
you really think about it, all innovation is actually making things easier, better, different.
yeah.
That's it.
Oh,
That's
I
all
like
it
that.
is, right? Easier, better,
Mm-hmm.
different. It doesn't have to be tech. It doesn't have to be something complex. It doesn't mean that to be innovative, we need to be building an application or learning how
Mm-hmm.
to code. It's literally how can we make everything around us a little bit easier, a little bit better, a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So innovating is like actually just problem solving. That's actually all it is. It's taking
Mm-hmm.
all the things that are around us and saying, okay, cool, let's put another twist on it. Let's make this a little bit more efficient. Let's make this work a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, right? And I mean, even this conversation is partly innovation, right? And all the people that are going on live is like the conversation I had this morning was like with 200 event organizers, and they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what they're going to do in a time where we can't have physical events. And
Yeah.
so this kind of interaction and virtual conversations are still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And all that is a response to the problem of we couldn't connect, we couldn't share, and now we're still able to do so. So I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's what innovating is. So I think what we really have to do, and what I try to encourage people to do, is to actually like dumb it down, simplify it. It doesn't have to be complex.
Mm-hmm.
Is like actually the simpler that we make it, the probably the more innovative it actually is.
Mm.
Yeah.
I like that you use the word simplify because I think we sometimes think that innovating is a little bit complicating things so that they look a certain way and they
Right.
change the way that it works. And I think we can all agree that in this time with this pandemic and everything that's going on, there's going to be a huge need for us to innovate almost the majority of our ideas.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think my biggest question would be that is there still enough room and support in our economy to be innovative or to bring innovative ideas to markets?
Yes, there definitely is because again, it's about problem solving. Right now, we
Right.
got more problems than we had, 2 months ago, right?
Yeah.
So I think for me, what I'm trying to tell people and our team and our clients, and when I speak to people in these kind of conversations, is that right
Mm.
now we actually don't have a choice, right?
And
Is You actually don't have a choice but to be a problem solver. And it used to be you couldn't do that if you didn't want to grow and scale. But right now, like
mm,
just to survive, you have to be innovative, right?
Sure.
I mean, we as a business, we've been looking at solutions that we've built over the last year, 18 months, and being like, cool, this is already built. Someone already paid for it. It's sitting on the shelf. Who else can we sell that to? Who else can we
Um,
package that for? Who else can we use this element for and the same functionality and just change it a little bit for another kind of client? That's innovating, right? Instead of being like, hey, let's create some brand new solution that we've never heard of before,
yeah.
that no one has ever seen. We don't
Mm,
actually need all of that. So I think right now is like there's certainly room, and there's an immediate need. Like in order for you to like just scale your, not even scale, just to survive, to get it through another month
yeah.
end, you have to innovate. You have to change the way you look at things. And again, if we just like maybe don't call it innovation for the rest of this conversation and just call it problem solving,
Problem
right?
solving. Okay. All right.
Because that and you know, not to say that we shouldn't call it innovation, but it's like just to get
Yeah.
rid of the connotations, right? Because
I
when
get
we think
that.
about the connotations, we think it needs to be tech. It means I need to be a developer. It means I need to spend money. It means I need to throw away every other idea I've ever had, right? And that's not
Mm,
what it is. It's like just
yeah.
little incremental improvements, easier, better, different. That's it.
I really,
You
really
know?
like that. The better, different. That
Yeah.
really, that's got a lot. So how can, which areas rather can small
Yeah.
business or side hustles start um, innovating in a sense that, like for instance, you find somebody that's selling like stuff online, or they've been
Yeah.
selling stuff at a smaller scale, what's like marketing, Avon products and whatever the case is. How do
Yeah.
we begin to kind of channel that problem solving mindset within our small businesses?
Yeah, for sure. I think it starts first with like the resources that we have available, right? So I
Mm,
mentioned like as a business, what we're trying to do is take the solutions we know we've already built and see how we can repackage them. Um,
mm,
a couple weeks ago, I saw that the alcohol delivery app Bottles, right? They
mhm.
shifted because they couldn't deliver alcohol anymore, and they partnered with Pick and Pay to be able to
Yeah.
deliver groceries, right? And yeah,
Mhm.
Uber Eats and a couple other people did it, but they were able to keep their wheels still in motion, their drivers still riding, their business
Mm,
still making revenue. They didn't change
mm,
anything, right? The app is still the same, the brand is still the same. All
yeah.
they changed was the service that they were selling and the goods that they were selling. But nothing else had to change in the business. So I think
Mm,
that's one thing that I want guys to walk away with is that no matter how small or big your company is like what can you do right now with the existing resources that you have? Innovating
mm.
is usually about not spending any money, right? It's like resources are
Oh,
restricted. What can we
mm.
do with what we've got, right? Like how can we flip it without having to do too much?
Clever.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's like the root of it. So for me, it's like look at the services you offer, look at the products you offer, look about how you're selling those things. What can you
Mm,
shift a little bit to give more people that same experience?
yeah.
So I think that's what guys need to start thinking about is like I don't need to come up with a brand new concept, right?
Mm.
You were selling shoes and now you want to go sell masks. I don't think that that's necessarily like the thing that all of us should be going for.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's innovating. I think it's
Mm,
really like, okay, cool. What supplies do we use to make shoes, right? Could we use those
mhm.
same supplies to make something else with? We've got these manufacturers, we've got these relationships, we've got this e-commerce system already set up. What else can I put up there that will
Mm,
make life easier for me instead of like completely leaving the industries that we're in and changing them? You know what I mean?
yeah. So now everybody will want to start selling masks because that's the way that seems to be quite innovative. It's a bit more
Yeah,
clear.
but it's not. It's kind of opportunism more than anything else, right? Yeah, and I mean, some car companies are doing that. Like Tesla, I think, was like, how do
Mhm.
we use all the machines that we have in the old car supplies to make new medical equipment, given the crisis, like respirators and things like that. That's innovation, right? They're like, we already got materials, we already got machines. Put those two things together.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what people's first focus should be instead of
Mm,
because it's going to be really hard to think of something you've never thought of before. to think of something that
So
no one's ever heard of before.
completely new.
You know, there's that saying that there's nothing new under the sun, right? And to a certain extent, there isn't. So that's why we have to focus on just like making it slightly better, slightly different. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's very important. I've been reading Blue Ocean,
Yes.
and I came across a very interesting concept that I actually want to ask you about that is apparently called value innovation.
Yeah.
So I've been
Cool.
reading
Talk
a
to
lot
me.
about it, and I've
Yeah.
just been, yeah, playing around with it in my head. And I just like you to kind of break it down to me in the most simplest forms.
Yeah.
I think there's a certain level of understanding sometimes that innovation has to be what people are seeing. So in our mind, if we think it's problem solving, we need to think that it's what's happening at face value. But I think
Yeah.
that concept for me has opened up to the fact that it's actually what actually happens at the back end that is then translated to what eventually happens in face value. So please just dissect and open that up for me.
No, cool. So I think if you took another definition of just innovating as a whole,
Mhm.
it's translating a concept or an idea into something that creates value, right?
Mm.
So we don't innovate just for the sake of innovating. Like we don't
Right.
smash the status quo just to smash it, right?
Mm.
The whole point of innovating is solving the problem and creating value with other people. So I think
Mm.
is that if that's what you lead with, because I think a lot of times what people lead with and why the concept of value innovation has come through is what people
Mm.
lead with is just like, no, it has to be new. It has to be something no one's seen
Yeah.
before, no one's talked about. And that's all we think about, right? And it has
Mm.
to be that's the model versus like, no, it's something that immediately as soon as I see it, I'm like, I get it. I see what you're
Mm.
doing here. You know what I mean? I see
Yeah.
like why that matters for me in my life and in my business and why that helps me. That's the shift that I think that Blue Ocean and a couple other guys are thinking about right now in terms of changing the perspective. Instead of being first, instead of just like smashing it, it's like how do we firstly create something that creates value for everyone that interacts with it? Because those are
Mm.
the ones, those are the innovations and the ideas that stick, right? If I'm
Yeah.
just focused on being new and being the fanciest and being like, blockchain and AI enabled, like,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, tomorrow there's going to be a new solution,
Mm.
right? Like quite soon, like right after, if you try to be the newest or the best, is that especially with technology, is like in a day or two, you're going to be replaced quite literally,
Yeah.
right? It's funny
Mm.
because Zoom, like the founders of Zoom, I think his net worth went up like $6 billion like 2 weeks ago, right?
Oh,
Because all these people were subscribing to Zoom, right?
yeah.
And then yesterday, Facebook announced that we've got WhatsApp video calls for up to 50 people. We've
I
got
saw that share
Facebook
dropped up,
chat.
but dropped down to 6%.
Exactly, right?
Hectic.
So
Mm.
that's the thing is that now, if you think about it, is like, was Zoom initially creating value for all of us, or were they just like just connecting all of us, right? Because now it's easier, it's cheaper, it's free for me to do it here. And WhatsApp, I don't have to ask anyone to figure it out or to hack it.
Yeah.
We're all already
Yeah.
communicating there. Most of our companies already have WhatsApp groups. It's
Mm.
simple. You see what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think if you're tied up in the features and the functionality of your innovation, instead of
Mm.
like, hey, how is this actually helping people and benefiting people? Um, that's the shift that we have to make, you know?
Yeah. So I have a
Yeah.
question about that Zoom scenario
Yeah.
because I've been following it up and I thought to myself, how do, let's say, small businesses, for instance, kind of protect themselves? So here's what I imagine happens. You're Zoom, which is a basic company that has always
Yeah.
existed and that's been providing the service.
Yeah.
And there's a pandemic and people are really consuming whatever it is that you've been producing at a very high rate. And then the big guys come and they take the very same concept
Yeah.
and they run with it and then you lose money. How do
Yeah.
you kind of idea proof? Is there even a way to do that? Like, what could Zoom
Yeah.
have done differently to make sure that whatever they offer can't be taken down by guys that have bigger budgets? Because it's always inevitable for these small companies that somebody that's bigger will come and take it and make it better because they've got the budget for it.
For sure. I think, you know, what that relates to is like, you know, Simon Sinek's got that principle of start with the why, right?
Yeah.
And the premise is that the bigger the why, the less important the what and the how, right? And if you truly believed, or if I could tell you, hey, what are the principles behind Zoom, right? Like, what is Zoom all about? Who is Zoom,
Yeah.
right? Ideally, you should be able to tell me that and connect with me and have that kind of connection to a brand, just like you would with your favorite car brand, right?
Yes.
I'm a Mercedes guy. If you ask me why, I'm going to say the best of nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's what I'm going to say. You're not going to convince me that some other German brand is better, because I'm like, no, this is Mercedes value. I know their story since day one. The best of nothing, right? That's me. So I think it's like that's where businesses have to stop focusing on what we're selling, what we're providing, what we're offering from our service standpoint, and really shift back to like, why are we in this and how do we communicate that value? Which goes back to the value innovation question. Like, what are we actually solving? Because if I know you're solving X for me, I'll never leave, because it actually doesn't matter who has the exact same features, right? If all you're solving for me is connectivity, right? I'm like, cool, I can use a million different services. Today alone, I've had a WhatsApp call, I've had a Skype call, I'm on Instagram Live now, I've had 2 different Zoom calls, right? All of those things did the exact same thing, right? None of them were special in terms of the interaction that I was having. That's not a good place to be in if you're in the business of connectivity, right? Because that means your consumer is like literally going to 6 different channels to communicate every day. And then I had a normal phone call, which was like the oddest one. It was like, who's calling me on my phone? Like, you know what I mean? So that's the thing, is that if that's the only thing you're offering, it's easy to get replaced. It's easy for a big guy, or not even a big guy, a small guy, to pop up and do the exact same thing as you and say maybe he can do it cheaper. And so that's why we have to go back to that why, and we have to go back to that problem that we're actually solving. Because if you're in the business of solving a problem, no one's ever going to get rid of you. You know, I've been speaking to my accountant almost daily the last couple of weeks, just because it's been a difficult time, you know, in business. And initially, when you're thinking about cutting back, you're like, all right, cool, who do we cut back? Who do we shift in this time? Which services do we trim? And I'm looking at the accountant invoice there, and I'm like, all right, is this something that's worth it before we start speaking every day? And then I realized that this guy's not just a bookkeeper. He's not just about number crunching and telling us how many invoices are outstanding. He's over here like saying, hey, this is how we need to save money. And these are the things that you need to do to sustain yourself. And these are the margins that we need to aim for. He's now a priceless commodity. And in actual fact, that's when you're thinking about, okay, cool, maybe I need to bump his cheese up actually, because he's doing more than just being an accountant. He's now he's a trusted advisor, right? That I can't live without. Literally, we speak daily, right? So that in that scenario, I'm like, he's giving me complete value because he's transitioned from being a bean counter and a number cruncher to being an advisor in my business that I need to continue speaking with. You see what I mean? And that's innovation right there. That's a shift. And that's the value add, right? Are there a million accountants out there? Yes, there are a dime a dozen, literally, right? And they all do the exact same service initially, right? They check your numbers, they balance your sheets, they tell you how much money you got left in the bank, right? And that's it. Versus a guy who's like, or if I'm like, hey, how are we going to shift to extend this 1 month of cash flow to 2? I know he's going to be able to help me think about a scenario that's more than just moving money around. He's like, cool, well, we need to find 2 contracts that are worth X, right? Because in the past, you've finished them quickly, they've paid quickly, and this is who you need to go after, right? This is your best client, not by revenue, but by getting you quick money. So if you want quick money, call them and try to get a brief out of them. You see what I mean? Versus someone who's like, hey, no, we just need to make X amount more money. Good luck. You see? Yeah.
I like that because that answers the whole Zoom scenario that I've been having when you talk about value quite a lot. Now, I want to know from your side, I mean, what inspired you to actually start getting into that zone? Because when you started, it wasn't so famous. I mean, I first heard innovation through you. it wasn't
Yes.
such a big it wasn't such a big buzzword. So yeah. So Joe Human just left a comment for you, Mr. M. I don't know if you can read it.
I can see
Hi,
you,
Joe.
Joe.
I'm chatting to him tomorrow, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Nice one. I'll be sure to tune in. I stand him as well.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot, and I've also seen him rise. I need to remind him. I interviewed him on a radio show I had many years ago
Oh, wow.
before he was Joe Human. He was still just Joe.
No human.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But you asked like how I got into this space.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, it's been a long time coming. I didn't necessarily study tech or strategy or development or anything like that. To be
Mhm.
frank, I mean, I studied politics at school. But growing up, my dad,
That's
yeah, it was. I thought I was gonna, run for president one day.
oh,
Yeah, but that's a whole nother conversation. But growing up, my dad worked at Apple Computer, and I think there it kind of taught me the process of innovating because during that time in like the early mid 90s, Apple was transitioning from like a company that was on the ropes to like the Apple that we know about today.
yeah.
And so I think that's what kind of put my love for tech in this space. And then 10 years ago, when we first started Altivex, I actually just saw a bunch of friends that were in this space that were super talented, that were kind of undervalued and underpaid.
Mhm.
Black creatives, especially at that time in this country, is just like wasn't super sexy. It wasn't exciting. And so what I tried to do is kind of fill that gap, building really cool solutions. And that's where we've kind of rooted the business in over the last couple of years is just being like go-to guys for building apps, for building custom websites, for building custom platforms, for dreaming up these kind of big innovative ideas. And luckily, we've got a decent footing 10 years in. Yeah. Did I lose you again? Are we back? Cool. So that's what I was just saying is that that's kind of what's rooted like our desire to kind of be a company that builds that is that a lot initially it was people that just didn't look like us that were in this space and now we've got a decent footing in terms of like building and scaling it.
Yeah. Okay. You also talk a lot about exponential. I
Yeah.
also want to get into that.
Cool.
And I think before I get into that, I'm just going to let me ask you. There's a question that just came on.
Okay, go.
Um, oh, and I think it comes from your Stan account. Joe says, "What's being?" This thing keeps running away from me. It says, "What's being some of the toughest challenge in tech, considering that the market is always changing and Africa doesn't always get the resources and the structures firsthand?" Yeah, I was actually going to ask something
Yeah.
like this.
No, I mean, yeah, it's what we've been talking about is that if you're
Yeah.
just relying on the tech side of it, it just moves too fast, right?
Mm.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with tech is that the pace in which that it moves is a million miles an hour, right? And so I think that's why we can't get rooted in trying to keep up with it. I mean, even as you and I are speaking here, there's new tech that's being announced. There's
Yeah.
new features being rolled out. It's next to impossible to
Mm.
just keep up with technology, even if you're in it. But
Mm.
I'd argue that Africa is actually, and this is something that's super passionate for me to talk about, is that Africa as a whole is a market leader in terms of technology. We've got, yes, we are. Yeah. You know what? I think the perception is that we always have to go to Silicon Valley or Tel
Right.
Aviv or the rest of the world, Singapore, to talk about amazing technology. But we've got guys here that have connected a human brain to the internet. We've got guys here that do malaria testing without taking a drop of blood. We've
Mm.
got guys here that are delivering, goods and robotics using drones all over Rwanda and East Africa. So there's really like Wakanda-like technology that happens
Hmm.
here that I really like telling the story of, because we don't talk about it enough and we don't own our excellence, especially in the tech and innovation space.
Hmm.
And so for me, I'm like, we've got world leading banks, we've got world leading peer to peer Pesa mobile wallets. You know,
Hmm.
95% of money in Zim last year was transacted digitally, right? So Zimbabwe
Yeah.
is like one of the only cash free societies on earth,
Yeah.
right? Like way leaps
Interesting.
and heads beyond the US and parts of Europe. No one is as
Hmm.
far as Zimbabwe is. And yes, that
Sure.
came out of a problem and a collapsed economy and a collapsed government, but that's innovation, right? Is
Hmm.
that Zimbabwe could have just collapsed, but no, it shifted. So I think there's stories like that, and I think we have to shift our perspective to say that, you know what, we actually are doing really amazing things locally, and we need to own that excellence. But I think it's just about exposing those stories, is because we don't talk about it enough. And we talk about it from a problem standpoint, not a solution standpoint.
Mm. That's
Yeah.
actually so powerful. You just reminded me of, I know Strive hasn't written a book yet, but there is a book
Yes.
that's been put out by somebody who put together his different threads. And he does
Yes.
talk about how, what you said about problem solving, how everything that he's been doing in Zimbabwe and him trying to bring all these products has been a way of trying to solve a problem to cater to his
Exactly.
people.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Which is unique, right? Is like those kind of problems don't exist elsewhere in the world,
Mm.
right? The reason San Francisco will never be 100% cash-free society is because it doesn't have to be, right? They've got
Sure.
other options, right?
Yeah.
So it's like those things make us unique and make our situation like unique to be able
Mm.
to solve. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want us to shift our perspective on like where Africa sits and stands. Is that we're actually in a
Yeah.
really good spot. Yeah.
Mm. Do you think that maybe there is a gap between how we are coming up with this tech versus the reception, with the sense that not, well, majority of South Africans wouldn't be able to afford that high tech that is being brought out, that
Yeah.
whole a human being being connected to a brain thing. Do you think maybe there's a gap between that that possibly could be solved by the economy, but tech is not the actual issue?
Yes, yes and no. I think the great part about technology is, I mean, you asked about exponential growth, right?
Yeah.
Is technology is directly associated with exponential growth, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
this morning, for instance, I was on a Zoom webinar conference call with 160, 170 people, right? In
Yeah.
170 different locations. Without technology, it would have been impossible for us. Sorry about that. It would have been
Yeah.
impossible for us to connect all those people, right?
Mm. Mm.
In 165 different locations, all speaking and being able to share in one place. Even now, I mean, you've got all of your followers, all my followers combined, being able to connect with us in this conversation, all in
Yeah.
our respective locations. So tech is a great neutralizer because it's the cheapest form of spreading our message and
Mm.
communicating, right? Is
Mm.
that right now, this isn't costing us very much, right?
Right.
Yes, it's a little bit of data. Yes, it's a little bit from our broadband, but it's really not costing you. I mean, what you're binge
Right.
watching on Netflix today is costing you more than tuning into this
Than
conversation.
being alive, yeah.
You know what I mean, right? It's not.
Mm.
So that's the amazing exponential part of technology, is like you want scale, you want reach, and you want it cheaply. Tech is always going to be the way we do so, right?
Mm.
So to take it back to the guys at WITS that have connected the brain to the internet, the same
Mhm.
students in another division used 3D printing to print prosthetic limbs, right? Like prosthetic
Wow.
arms, ears, legs, and they use 3D printers. So before, it used to cost upwards of $250,000 for a prosthetic limb. Now
Mm.
it can cost you like 2,500 Rand if you get it 3D
Yeah.
printed. You see what I mean? So like tech opens up access incredibly so. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Is that before
Yeah.
is like for me to speak to you if you're in another
Hmm.
country was going to be
Hmm.
impossibly expensive. For us to be
Yeah.
on a live conversation for an hour, You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like how, who, how, what? Like even when Skype first launched, that was expensive.
True.
Now all of us can connect seamlessly and basically at zero cost,
Yeah.
right? I mean that's why
Mm.
data has to continue to fall and so forth. So I think for me, text the neutralizer, and it's how we're going to go in terms of the market. So that's what
Mm.
I'm excited about.
Yeah. But I also like what you said earlier that um, being innovative isn't always about bringing tech in the picture.
Nah, that's it. It doesn't have
Be-
to be, because I think, you
Mm.
know, the solutions that are all around us, right? If you're thinking about things that make things easier, is that
Yeah.
my pen here is a technology, right? It's innovation
Mm.
to help me write. That's
Right.
it. You know what I mean? So it doesn't always have to be an app. It's maybe how you use it, right? So if we think about this as like before you didn't have enough reach with your audience and get to speak to enough people. Now you've got
Yeah.
that reach with a tech platform. You don't have to build anything.
Mm.
No, as Michelle and as any of your followers that are small business owners, there is nothing that you need to build or spend money on today. It's already exists, right?
Yeah.
There's already communication platforms out there. There's already tools
Mm.
that exist that are either really, really cheap or free.
Mm.
So that's, I think it's not to say that it's without tech, but it's like you don't have to build any tech. That's the
Mm.
perspective. You see what I mean?
Mm.
And even
Yeah.
us as a business, there's very few times where we're like developing solutions from scratch, where everyone is like
Mm.
coding from scratch. Now, what we're doing is taking different things that exist and putting them together. So, like, there's a
Right.
technical understanding of maybe an ecosystem and saying, okay, I'll pull this event software, I'll pull this e-commerce software, I'll pull this registration software, I'll pull this messaging software and put it into
Mm.
one. But we're not building all of it from scratch any longer.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes sense. She's inside. Sorry. Okay. And I mean, that's quite interesting. Sorry, I just got a bit distracted with you.
No, it's okay.
Um, it's quite interesting you say that because I've been camping on CNBC and all these channels, and you're seeing what everyone's talking about and what's happening
Yeah.
around the world, and just kind of how do we move forward and how do we shape that. Now, I want to ask, how do you I think for us as young entrepreneurs, particularly, how do we get to a space of, I'm saying that there's a huge problem with the need for exclusivity
Mm,
and the need for doing something brand new, the need for doing
mm,
something more tech savvy that needs a factory to make it happen. And I feel like at some point we're running away from the small, simple ideas that could change our communities. But we
yeah.
want to do
Yeah.
the value stuff. We want to do the most remarkable things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how do we start changing and shifting each other's mindsets um, to actually about focusing on things that actually matter and being innovative with those things. It's like if you look at a country like Zimbabwe, for instance, and you look at guys like Strive, these are guys that were innovators in areas that were able to help their people. But
Yeah,
I
for
think that
sure.
there's a lag in South Africa with as far as us creating products and innovative ideas for the people and the situations that we actually are in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think people have to move away from the things that are sexy. Um, you know,
Yeah.
honestly, and
Mm.
they have to move away from the things that like sound like great media opportunities and sound like the most amazing things that no one's ever heard of before. I think
Yeah.
we have to shift there. And I think, again, innovation in its purest sense is about problem solving and fixing little solutions. So if you're able to do so, that's where you're going to get scale, and that's where you're going to get value, and that's where you're going to get impact. So
Mm.
I'd actually advise guys to look around and try to think of simple solves, simple solutions. And it doesn't have to be incredibly complex. I mean, if I look at the founder of Sweep South, right?
Mm. Yeah.
The service that she's rendering is not sexy, right? She's
Mm.
offering cleaning
Yeah.
services
Yeah.
and domestic services for people, right? But that's
Mm.
resulted in a business that's scaling literally by multi-millions of rands every month,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like that. that's what's exciting, is that she solved a simple problem. She was like, let me connect people um, that that need cleaning services, and let me connect them to cleaners in a seamless way and make it super easy for you to be able to order and request that service and for it to be cost effective. Cool. You know what I mean? She solved multiple problems that I have on a daily basis, that we all have
Yeah.
on a daily basis, right? And that's it. So now there was nothing particularly sexy about the business model or about the solution that she's solving, but she's
Yeah.
building quite a solid empire by just solving problems. And so that's the thing, is that I think sometimes people think that, like, if it's so basic, it's not going to make money or it's not going to scale. And it's actually the transverse. If you can make money doing things very simply, typically the most innovative business models or the most successful business models were just that. They're guys that did something very, very basic and then just pushed it, and no one else was competing against with them in that market. Because that's the thing, is that everyone's competing on certain things. Do you need another rideshare business? No. There's enough, right? And enough
Yeah.
African ones. There's enough. There's plenty. But if we can do something else that's a little bit different, I think there's
Yeah.
now some exciting opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that also gives room for what they call the purple cow
Yeah.
in this time, because we've got enough of a couple of things already, but how do you simplify what we already have and make it
Yeah.
a bit more better? Yeah. So I'm just going to give the